So welcome to the presentation, California Water, Who Has It and Who Doesn't. My name is Nina Gordon-Kirsch, and I am so grateful to be here hosted by Jesse and the Urban Adama team to talk to you all about what is happening with justice and injustice in the California water scene. So I'm guessing Jesse went over this before I arrived, but just to be clear, oh, he didn't. Okay, great. So if everybody could stay on mute, that would be wonderful, just to not have background noise during the presentation. And definitely utilize the chat box so we can have an open discussion and I can answer any questions that you might have. And I'd also like to do a land and water recognition. Urban Adama is on land that has been historically tended by the Chochenyo Ohlone people and is in the Coronesis Creek watershed. And I just want to take a moment to think about all of the people and the generations and the families who have tended the land that we walk on and that we live on, and recognize the natural water home where we live. And sometimes I think it feels arbitrary to say that I live in Oakland when that doesn't really have a greater meaning of context of where I live. And to me, it feels more meaningful to notice that I live in the Temescal Creek watershed, and that tells me about what waterway is near me, and it also tells me what plants live there based on the Temescal Creek watershed, and what birds might visit and what animals. So taking a moment to think about the history and the natural history of where each of us are located. So tonight, we're going to go over a few different pieces. We're going to all introduce ourselves, not to each other one by one, but I want to get to know you all in the chat box, so we'll do that. And then we're going to talk about water rights in California specifically. And I say California specifically because water rights change where you go and what states you're in. And my knowledge is primarily about California. And I know because of Zoom, there might be people who aren't in California on this call, but this talk will be about California. And then we'll go into the subject matter of who has water and who doesn't. And then we'll end by completing the loop on our water systems and where we get our water from, specifically in the Bay Area. So to start, I want to get to know who's here, and I'm going to ask that people post in the chat box. So open up your chat box and write your name, where you're zooming in from, whether that's the Indigenous heritage place or the city that we call it, or watershed, and then why you're here or what you're hoping to get out of the presentation tonight. So go ahead and open up your chat box. Great. Hi, Malama. Okay, great, near Sacramento River watershed. So yeah, go ahead and type your name, where you're zooming in from, and a little bit about why you're here or what you want to learn about tonight so we can talk more about it. Hi, Christina. Temescal Creek watershed, right near where I live. Hi, Alice. Nice knowledge. Judy's in Berkeley, maybe the Strawberry Creek watershed, very cool. Kathy, Sacramento River watershed in Chico, working on water rights issues, great. Ilana Nadav, Berkeley, curious, cool. Leah or Leah from San Francisco, Here for general education and cultivate further gratitude surrounding water. Beautiful. Rory from Park Boulevard Creek Watershed, interested in the politics of water in California. Rachel from Oakland, maybe Temescal or Sassel Creek watersheds, and wants to incorporate more water rights into 6th grade social studies curriculum. Nice education. Melissa, hi Melissa, on Ohlone land, Glen Echo Creek watershed. Simi, Berkeley, wanting to learn more about where water is sourced, how it's protected, how it's distributed, really anything. Great. Yeah, I learned anything about water tonight. Perfect. Well, was here to learn about legal, social, and historical structures shaping relations with waters. Wow, I'll try. Mark, hi Mark, Cordonices Creek watershed, retired California water engineer, looking forward to hearing my perspective on the complicated topic. Yes, very complicated. Jake Rogers, hi Jake, El Cerrito, learn about water and learn from a great friend. Beautiful. Nice. We'll keep them coming in the intros. I'm going to move on for sake of time, but I'm going to keep the chat box open so I can see what else people say. A little bit about me. If you came to my last presentation, you already know my background, but just so you know a little more, is I have a bachelor's of science in environmental science and marketing. I'm very interested in learning about the psychology and participating in the psychology of how marketing affects people's relationship to their environment. And after undergrad, I went to Israel and I studied emerging contaminants in the wastewater treatment facilities. So looking at how newly created contaminants like endocrine disrupting compounds, like from birth control or from plastics, things like that, and what happens to them during the breakdown of the wastewater treatment facilities. And then I stayed in Israel to get my master's degree, and I studied Palestinian wastewater and how Palestinians can reuse their own wastewater in their own culture. And some fun facts about me, so that this isn't just education, is the picture is of me and my dog and one of my 6 chickens. I tend a permaculture garden. And I love my dog, Pete. I love cupcakes. And the thing, I always tell people this, and I hope it sticks with you, the thing that I truly believe in is that small actions times lots of people equals big change. And that is one of the pieces that helps me live my everyday life, is knowing that the small actions I'm doing can ripple, and with a lot of other people doing them with me, it can make big change. So a lot of people ask me, what do you do? Like, what do you give these water talks online, but like, what else do you do? So I have a few jobs, and I'm going to tell you about them because they are going to be incorporated in tonight's presentation. And the first one that is most applicable to tonight's presentation is that I'm a high school teacher. I teach one high school class about water in California. It's called Cal Studies Water. And it's at the urban school, and I co-teach with a man named Richard Lautsy. And I've learned most of what I'm going to teach you all tonight from this class, from being a teacher of this class. I've gotten the privilege of learning so much. And this is a picture of this past semester when we had to be virtual and not actually go out and learn about the California water systems, but we sat in our homes learning and having guest speakers come into our Zoom classroom. And we took a virtual trip up to the Klamath River to learn about dams. And this is a picture of me on the day of our trip. So a little peek into my high school teacher life. I'm a greywater installer with Greywater Action, where we teach people how to install their own laundry to landscape systems. So hooking up their laundry machines to go to their backyard and feed their plants. And another job I have is I work at the State Water Resources Control Board, which is the governing body for water in the state of California. And I work with Melissa, who's on this call, on on-site wastewater treatment and reuse. So organizations and companies that aren't hooked up to municipal wastewater treatment facilities, what they do with their water to treat it before putting it back in the ground or reusing it on site and making sure they're up to standards. So all of this kind of informs our talk tonight because it's where I learned what I'm going to teach you all. So I just want to give credit to the organizations that have trained me to be able to be here. So let's get started. Some background. This is kind of the bigger questions, and I'll just preface this by saying someone in the chat had said like that they're interested in seeing what my perspective is on a complicated issue. So water rights in California is a really complicated issue, and I don't know all of the answers, and I'm here to provide you with a background and open up a discussion, and hopefully at the end of tonight's presentation, some people will want to stay behind and ask a lot of questions and we can discuss. But this is a complicated issue, so if you get lost along the way, or if you have questions that don't get answered tonight, that is very normal, and water rights and regulation in California is complex. So first, there's two different types of water rights we're going to go over: surface water, and there's two different types: riparian water rights and appropriative water rights. And then after, we'll talk about groundwater rights. So specifically in California, surface water and groundwater are treated very differently in terms of access. Surface water, which the first part we'll talk about is riparian water rights. Riparian means relating to or situated on the banks of a river. So riparian water rights refers to when you own land that is next to a river. Your property line goes right up to the river. That means that you have access to the water that's in that river. Yeah, so if your land has a river running through it or on a border, you get to access that water. And the State Water Resources Control Board has a clause about this, about riparian water rights, that a riparian right entitles the landowner to use a correlative share of water flowing past their property. Riparian rights do not require permits, licenses, or government approval, but they do apply to water which would naturally flow in the stream. So that's what's written about riparian water rights for the state of California. And feel free to type questions in the chat as we go along if there's things that you want clarification on, and I'll try to keep an eye on that and see if I can answer anything. So the second type of surface water rights is appropriative water rights. And there's two types of appropriative water rights. There are pre-1914 water rights, which is before water was regulated. And this is called senior water rights. So people who had access to water before 1914 and were using it, like farms that were established before 1914, have unlimited access to water. They were, quote, grandfathered into that and are not required to have a permit. Christina asked, do riparian rights apply to canals, like in the image? So oops, let me go back. So this image is actually where we are standing are pumps that are taking water from the McCalmy River and putting them into a canal and irrigation ditch for this farmer's farm. And he has riparian water rights because his farm is on the McCalmy River, which is where these pumps are getting their water from. And he's using this water to irrigate his farms, and he has unlimited supply. So in this case, yes, this canal is fed by the McCalmy River, and he has unlimited access due to riparian water rights. Another question, are people allowed to just dump random chemicals into a river that goes through their property? No, that's a part of the Clean Water Act from the 70s, and I don't know specifics on it. And I bet Melissa or someone else on the call might know more specifics if they want to write in the chat box about it. Do riparian rights apply to those living on the banks of creeks? Oh, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, but I think yes. And feel free, anybody, to write in the chat if I'm wrong and if you know the right answer to that. Okay, so back to appropriative water rights. Pre-1914 and post-1914. So that's senior water rights, and then after 1914, the State Water Resources Control Board requires a permit for anybody who's using water. So if you bought your farm next to a river, a riparian area, but you bought that land after 1914, you do have to get a permit from the state in order to use water, and it shows what you're going to use your water for. And for the pre-1914, the senior water rights, that it's unlimited, but it's unlimited only for what is considered a beneficial use, and there's a description of what beneficial use is. So whatever that entity is using the water for has to fall under beneficial use as outlined by the state. And this slide is from UC Davis. So now we're going to move on to groundwater. Feel free to pop any more questions into the chat about surface water rights. I did a very quick background, so you might have a lot of questions. Groundwater in California and groundwater rights is a big issue. As you can see from these photos, I guess we'll talk about it in the next slide, but groundwater and surface water are treated very differently in California. And for groundwater, if you own the land above an aquifer, then you have legal rights to access the water that's below your land. And a little hydrological background, an aquifer is like an underground water storage. So I made a typo on the slide, but it should say groundwater aquifer. So picture a bunch of like sand and rock that's underground and water that seeps down into the sand and rock. Any porous space in between sand and rock, the water will be in those areas. And so depending on the land that you're on, there's going to be different amounts of water kept in the soil underneath your land, and that creates different aquifers. So I don't have a map right now of aquifers in all of California, but there's aquifers in many different areas. Different cities have aquifers under them, and it's not just like my property line has its own aquifer, but one aquifer could span a number, hundreds or tens, depending on the size of the property or the size of the aquifer. Many physical property owners on top of land share an underground aquifer. So when you picture it that way, if every homeowner who's on top of land has a straw, a well that goes down underground to a shared pool of water, in California, there were no regulations about groundwater until very recently. So people sharing one aquifer could take all different amounts, and none of that was regulated. So yeah, so one person, if there are 3 neighbors in a row, if one person takes a ton of water from underground, the other 2 people nearby might have dry wells or low, they'd have to dig their well even deeper in order to access more water. So because of that, there are now regulations in place that we'll talk about in a moment. And from these pictures, the background pictures, you can see another problem with taking groundwater from underground is subsidence, which is when the soil level falls. You can see in this middle picture in 1955, the ground of this farm in the San Joaquin Valley was up here. And then in 1977, it dropped down here. So that's a huge amount for the land to sink, to subside. And this is and this happens in the San Joaquin Valley. This picture is from the San Joaquin Valley because of farming. And that's like a really wonderfully agricultural area of the state of California and provides so much food for the whole entire nation, for the United States. And because there's so much farming, a lot of water is needed in order to feed all of those plants. So local wells will uptake water from the ground that's below them and then use it on the crops. So in the San Joaquin Valley, the soil level has actually dropped significantly. And this is also true, subsidence is also true in the Delta. And in the Delta, it's creating a really big problem because of all the waterways that surround the farms. There's levees, there's like built up pieces of land that stop water from spilling into farms because the farms have sunk so much that they aren't at sea level anymore. They're below sea level. So they have to create physical barriers, levees, to keep water from the Delta out of flooding farms. And it's thousands and thousands of dollars of upkeep per year to keep levees intact. And if the levee fails, then there goes the farmer's whole entire season of growing. So here's a little bit about what's happening in groundwater overdraft in the San Joaquin Valley. And this slide is from David Sunding, who was a guest speaker in my high school class this past semester, and he taught us about groundwater management in the San Joaquin Valley. And you can see the drawdown is the negative part, and we have so much drawdown in 2014, 15 during the drought, 16, and so those negative pieces are significantly bad because when aquifers get overdrafted, it's really hard to refill them. And so this image shows the state. You can see in the middle, this is the Central Valley up here, and then this is the San Joaquin Valley down here. And the San Joaquin Valley and the Central Valley are both either critically overdrafted or a high priority to make sustainability plans for. And again, like I was saying, this is the agricultural capital of our whole entire nation. So that's why it's been critically overdrafted, and it's also why we need to take really good care of this area for sustainable food production. So now, in order to combat that issue of groundwater overdraft and subsidence and managing how groundwater is being used in the state, in 2014, California passed something called the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, also known as SGMA. People just call it SGMA, SGMA. And this is the first time in California's history that we started regulating groundwater. And we were the last state in the Western United States to do that. So Arizona does it, Colorado does it, Nevada does it. And out of all the Western states, we were the last one to manage our groundwater. And I think that's particularly interesting considering the amount of agriculture that we have in our state. I can see why we were the last because of not wanting to regulate. And then I also, on the flip side, feel like we should have been the first, because if we're the leading state in our nation for food production, we should think about the long-term effects of how we're practicing agriculture. So SGMA requires agencies managing groundwater basins to halt overdraft and bring basins into hydrologic balance by 2040. So this was passed in 2014 and gives until 2040 to get back on track. It's a long adjustment period. In January 2020, this past January, groundwater agencies submitted initial plans to the state. So how SGMA works is, instead of having the state come in and tell each, I'll go back a slide so we can look at each of these counties, instead of the state coming in and telling each of them how to manage their water, they've been given or how Sigma works is that the counties work together to create their own plans and submit them to the state. So a number of counties that are next to each other, or organizations or farmers, can all work together and create a sustainable groundwater management plan that works for their location and their practices of how they're going to meet going back up to not being overdrafted and have a hydrologically sustainable groundwater, and present that. That's what had to be presented this past year. And so between 2020, from 2014 to 2020, they had to create those plans. And now from 2020 to 2040, they have 20 years to actually carry out those plans to become hydrologically balanced. And as we saw in the last map, most groundwater basins in the San Joaquin Valley are classified as critically overdrafted. And again, that's the agricultural capital of our nation. Whew, okay, that was a lot of information. Water rights and regulation in California that we just went over. I just want to take a second to give everybody a moment to transition into our next topic, and feel free to write anything in the chat or just note to yourself, what are some questions you have right now about how water is regulated or isn't regulated in the state of California? So just take a moment. Oh, great. And Melissa just dropped into the chat an online mapping platform that depicts the California groundwater basins to show what I was talking about, the different groundwater. Another interesting comment from Christina: California water is being exported in the form of almonds sold worldwide. Yeah, so we are the largest almond production in the world, and a lot of our almonds get exported. I don't know the exact number, but I think it's something like 80% of almonds grown in California are exported. Okay, so now we're going to move on. California water, who has it and who doesn't. And I'm actually going to focus really on who doesn't have water in California. And then at the end, we can talk more about who has it, because I think most of us who are on this call have water, and it feels to me like that's the default of taking water for granted, or just like having it is normal. And so I want to really highlight the voices and the people who don't have water in California. Yeah, these are pistachio trees from a company called Wonderful, which is one of the farms in the San Joaquin Valley who have an excess amount of water due to power. So they actually do have water. I put that slide in here, but we'll move on to the people who don't. So I wanted to show a clip of a film, and I'm not sure if it's gonna work, but I'm gonna try it. So I'm gonna see if I can load and share this. Hold on. Okay, hold on. Are you all able to see a screen that has a video on it now? Yeah. Okay, and let's see if you can hear any audio? No, okay. Share computer sound. Okay, let me see. I'm just gonna watch this film, Water and Power of California Heights.
California officials are putting mandatory restrictions on water use in place. California is now in its worst drought since the 1970s.
The hardest hit area in the entire state, Tulare County.
This is the town without water. East Porterville is ground zero in the California drought, a 21st century dust bowl.
Okay, right there. That's good.
Thank you. Where we're going on this street is close to the main river, which is called Tule River. And if you go down the streets and you see tanks or boxed water to the house, they're out of water. And I thought I'd be doing this for 3 months, but it's been almost 3 years now. And Ruben's been helping me for the last year and a half. Ruben's also out of water.
Hola. ¿Cómo está? Okay.
She has been without water ever since I've been doing this for 3.5 years. This is what they have. And they have to haul their water from the fire station over here and other places where they can get the water.
Thank you so much. Dana es un ángel. No sé, si ella no hubiera empezado a traernos agua, no sé qué hubiéramos hecho.
It's a battle every day. How are you? Any kind of water you want to drink around here, it's going to be bottled water. I mean, it's a battle every day. How are you going to wash your hands? How are you going to wash your face? How are you going to take a shower? How are you going to cook? How are you going to drink? How are you going to do dishes? That's another big thing, too. We'd have to load up tubs to take them over around the corner to wash them and then bring them back, and then they get dirty. And bacteria just builds up, so paper plates. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, so I highly suggest watching this film, Water and Power, A California Heist. It was made in 2015 and came out in 2017, and it speaks about regular California residents who don't have water in their house. Michael, that last man who was just talking about how is he going to wash his dishes, when he turns his tap on, there's no water that comes out. So I just want to sit for a moment and have everybody just think about turning your tap on, turning on your faucet, and what would it feel like to not have water come out of your faucet? Or you go to take a shower and you turn the shower on, you're hot from a sweaty day at work, and there's no water that comes out of your shower. So it's not a reflection activity for 1 million California residents. There are 1 million California residents who don't have access to clean drinking water. And some of that is like Michael and not having it turn on in their taps. And then some of it is more about clean water and having nitrogens in their tap water or other contaminants in their tap water. So yeah, I see some people saying they're washing dishes while tuning in. Yeah, whoa, like some people can't do that. Yeah, and especially Judy's saying now during COVID of not having access to water, it's really, really big. So East Porterville is located in the San Joaquin Valley, right? In those places of overdrafted groundwater and dry areas that don't have rivers running through. And a piece that feels like the stark difference between who has water and who doesn't is these pistachios, the wonderful company called Wonderful growing pistachios, is just near Tulare County. So this bounty of trees is getting irrigated just miles away from where Michael turns on his tap and doesn't have anything come out. And so for some folks, out of those million California residents who don't have access to clean drinking water, they'll go to the local Safeway or place where they can fill up gallons of water and pay for water and bring it home. And this is much more expensive than what I personally pay to my utility, to East Bay Mug, for my water. It changes depending on where they live to fill up water, but it's a common occurrence. And when I take my high schoolers on field trips, we go to the Central Valley and we experience what it's like. We try to get an experience of what it's like to live that kind of life. And we go to something called a water windmill. These water windmills are located all throughout the Central Valley and the San Joaquin Valley. And they're places in the center of town where everybody comes to fill up their water. It's the watering hole. It's where people hang out, they fill, they talk, and they pay for that water to be able to bring it home and use it. And it's a big eye-opener for someone like me who has grown up in a home that always has tap water that comes out of the tap and tap water that is rated to a standard that is safe to drink. And that's not true for everyone. So just imagine what life would be like going to the water hole anytime you needed to fill up water and bring it home. And that water is heavy and you have to transport it and figure out ways to transport it and move it around your house. So now we're going to move from East Porterville in the San Joaquin Valley over to the Owens Valley, which is on the east side of the Sierra Nevada mountain range. And I'm going to offer the information that was given to me from two different organizations on the east side of the Sierra. I have some slides from the Big Pine Paiute Tribe and from the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission that I'll be using to talk about water and who doesn't have water over there. So here's a map from Sally Manning, who's the environmental director of the Big Pine Paiute Tribe. There's a bunch of different Paiute tribes along the east side, and Big Pine is one of them. The Owens River is the main body of water through the east side of the Sierra, through the Owens Valley, and it goes into Owens Lake, or what was Owens Lake. Historically, the indigenous people who lived in these lands, the Paiute tribes, would make ditches from the river out to the sides and do agriculture out here, or grow plants, edible plants, out in the sides of these rivers. And that was how the Big Pine Paiute tribe lived for hundreds of years, is having small plots of agriculture with man-made ditches of water from the Owens Lake and the Owens River. Then about a little over 100 years ago, in 1913, the Los Angeles Aqueduct was built. And at this first intake, which is a location that lets X amount of river stay in the Owens, X amount of water stay in the Owens River, and then X amount of water go into the LA Aqueduct, it pulls water out of the Owens River and brings it down to Los Angeles. After the LA aqueduct was built, that supply of water to the Owens Lake was hugely cut off in a way that wasn't natural and didn't replenish the river body along the way to the Owens Lake. And because of that, the Owens Lake actually physically dried up, completely gone. So the Owens Lake is no longer the Owens Lake. We'll hear more about this from my next voice, who I'm gonna speak about from a different tribe. But this area just became a complete dust bowl when the water in the lake left. There's high winds on the east side of the Sierra, so a dried up lake plus high winds equals huge dust storms. Then in 1970, the LA aqueduct was expanded, and more water was proposed to be taken, and it even went up farther to Mono Lake even later, another expansion. In addition to the aqueduct, which is like riparian water rights, taking water from the river, owning the land, physically buying property along the river, and then taking that water, riparian water rights. The Department of Water and Power in Los Angeles also has pumping wells, groundwater sources, all along this area, the east side of the Sierra. So they're utilizing both their riparian water rights and their groundwater rights in California to take surface water and groundwater. So Terry Red Owl, who is the executive director of the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission, was also a guest speaker in my high school class this past semester. And she taught us a lot about the problems that that the Paiute tribes on the east side of the Sierra are experiencing because of water being taken from them. So first, to just introduce you all to the east side of the Sierra, the Owens Valley. In Terry Red Owl's heritage, they call, in the Paiute tribe language, they call the area Paya Hunadu. Paya Hunadu means land of flowing water. And historically, for generations and generations, that area was a land that had so much flowing water and greenery and rivers and creeks, and it doesn't look like that anymore. So as illustrated before, but this is a little more in depth, this was kind of how the Paiute would use the water, be in relationship with the Owens River. Prior to the arrival of settlers in Paya Hunadu that began around 1859, the Paiute irrigated vast areas of land. So this is important to bring up because of water rights, and pre-1914 water rights, as I said before, are signified based on beneficial use. And part of the argument when water was taken away from the Paiute people was that they weren't using the water, that it wasn't beneficial use. They were living, they were culture, until these sketches and this part of the history of the Paiute people about irrigating came up. So this proves that they actually were using the water in a beneficial way to their society. The ancient Paiute irrigation networks covered 60 square miles and included dams and one ditch per plot of land irrigated. These are all from Terry Red Owl, and owns all the land on the east side of the Sierra now in the Owens Valley. And you'll see that the red color is, or reddish orange, is the Bureau of Indian Affairs tribal lands. That's the land that now belongs to the Paiute tribes. And I have trouble finding it. There are such small little pieces of land that is currently in today's world owned by tribal people. So out of 458,000 acres, 1,747 acres belong to the tribes. And those are the little reservations in the east side that show thinking back to the water rights that we learned about earlier, pre-1914 water rights. It's just a big piece that Richard, my co-teacher from my high school class, and I can't fathom is pre-1914 who and so why is that? Why is it that white settlers get pre-1914 but the Paiute people don't? It's because they weren't considered people. They were kicked out of their homelands and enslaved and told to go elsewhere and whitewashed, and that's just like a huge injustice that needs to be named, that Indigenous people absolutely were pre-1914, yet today don't have the same access. So in 2017, 70% of Los Angeles's drinking water came from Payahunari, or the valley. That's a lot of water from Los Angeles that arrives from a different location. And this is what happened when the Owens Valley dried up, when the Owens Lake dried up. The Owens Lake became this huge dust bowl that caused immense health issues for people. Asthma increased, and there's big health issues. And the people who are facing those issues are the Paiute people and the other residents who live in the Owens Valley. And it's not, the health impacts are not seen in Los Angeles by the Los Angeles residents who get the water that created this dust bowl. So just moving back for a moment, I think so we're nearing the end of the presentation, and I'm wanting to also just name a few pieces before moving on to our water systems in the Bay Area, and to say that one is this story of what's happening on the east side of the Sierra is often villainized when we look at California water systems. Like, it's very easy for people to just say like, oh, that's a bad thing, what happened in LA, like, let's not do that. And the reality is things like this happen everywhere, and Los Angeles just often gets a really bad rap for that. So just wanting to name that this happened, like in Oakland, we get our water from really far away. In San Francisco, and I just don't want to I don't want to personally just bash on Los Angeles, but it's a good example to teach using this example. And then the other thing I'll just mention before we move on also is that this isn't just an Indigenous issue on the east side of the Sierra. The idea that Indigenous folks are getting deprived of water is a California statewide issue. It's not just on the east side of the Sierra, it's happening everywhere. And we had a guest speaker in my high school class who's from up by the Klamath River, David Tripp, and he also spoke about the issues around his community. They actually, part of the Karuk tribe, they they aren't even, there's 5 different tribes up there and they're not all recognized by the government. And because they aren't federally recognized, they actually don't get a lot of the rights that federally recognized tribes get. So there's a whole other piece around water access that has to do with being federally recognized or not. So there's loops and hoops and barriers for Indigenous people to have access to water. So now in our last little bit, if you've been to one of my presentations before, you will know that I am very passionate about us learning where our water comes from. And here is that favorite graphic of mine from Holy H2O. How do we get our water in our homes? Well, there's rain somewhere. I don't really know what happens in between, but then I turn on my tap and I get water, and it's awesome. So that's what I grew up thinking, and I can imagine it relates to other people as well. And we're going to close that gap right now and just go over in our last 5 or 10 minutes where our water comes from. So where does East Bay water come from? East Bay water, the East Bay Municipal Utility District, gets its water from the McCalmy River, the McCalmy River watershed. I have heard that Indigenous folks pronounce it Muckalumni, and it means people of the fish. Historically, has been by the Indigenous people walk and up in the Sierra foothills. Pardee Reservoir is one of the 2 major reservoirs that East Bay mud uses to hold water. Pardee Reservoir is where our drinking water is held. And then Comanche Reservoir, which is just below it, is where East Bay mud mitigates other pieces that they have to be in charge of. For instance, in order to create Pardee Reservoir, they had to also have a recreating space, or offer something to the public, and have flood control and be able to do flows more, to have excess water for river flows. So Pardee Reservoir is where we get our water from. Comanche Reservoir is for all of the other things. And then our water comes down in a big water pipe. Actually, there's portions where there's 3 water pipes coming down for security reasons, and into Oakland and Berkeley and Richmond and 1.4 million people. So this is my kitchen sink, and I have a sticker there that says on tap McCalmy River. And it allows me to talk about it with people. Anyone who comes to my house, they turn on my sink and they're like, what is that word that I can't pronounce? And I'm like, oh, I'm so glad you asked. And then we get to talk about everything on this left side picture. The McCalmy River. So where does our water go after we use it? Not all places the water provider is the same as the wastewater collector, but here in the East Bay it is. East Bay mud collects our wastewater, and they also provide us with drinking water. And our water, all of the wastewater in the East Bay goes to one wastewater treatment facility, which is right near the bay. And then that water, after it's treated, goes into the bay. I saw in the beginning there was someone from San Francisco, so just to go over San Francisco quickly, is San Francisco gets its drinking water from Yosemite, and this is a picture of the Hetchy Valley on the left before the drinking water reservoir was created, and then on the right, this is after it was dammed by O'Shaughnessy Dam in the early 1900s, and it created San Francisco's drinking water. And this slide was made by my high school students. So the transmission path of SF water is, it drops in elevation the whole way pretty much, which is how this is a viable source for San Francisco water. Is it starts up at Hetchy and is at high elevation and then keeps dropping all the way to the bay. And not only is it providing the city with water, but it's also providing the city with power through hydropower. And where does San Francisco water go after they use that? There's 2 different treatment facilities, one on the west side of the city and one on the east side of the city. And that's because there's a dividing line of elevation kind of down the middle. So everything that's collected on the western side goes to the southeast treatment facility and is treated and put into the bay. And then everything on the western side goes to Oceanside Treatment Plant and is treated and goes out into the bay. SFPUC is one of the leading utility districts for water management in terms of sustainable thinking and forward thinking. And there's a lot of reusing of water that's happening. And SFPUC is pushing really hard, spending a lot of money, a lot of energy, and a lot of time to try to make their systems more green, such as reusing reclaimed water to irrigate all of Golden Gate Park and projects like that. And because of regulations, it's really hard to be able to do that. And SFPUC is doing all of that hard work and getting the permits needed in order to do that. And if anybody is from Marin, Marin gets its water, 75% of Marin Municipal Water District water comes from the local watershed, the Mount Tam watershed, which is awesome. And here's a picture of Alpine Dam, where I normally take my high schoolers. There's a reservoir on this side, and you can hike here. It's a beautiful redwood area on Mount Tam, and that gives Marin has a much smaller population than the East Bay or than San Francisco. And other water in Marin comes from the Russian River. So I think with that, we're about at the end of our time, and I'm just going to end by telling you about a journey I'm taking that a lot of you probably know about, but some of you might not, so I have to tell you again, which is that I am planning to backpack this water line of how East Bay Mud gets our water to Oakland. I have received a vision where I would be stepping outside of my front door with my backpack on, and weeks later, or who knows, different chapters amount of hiking later, I would end all the way up here in Highland Lakes, which is the headwaters of the Macombie River above our reservoirs. And I feel it's important to really name the land of the Indigenous people that I'll be walking on and start building relationships with them. So I've started meetings with Segorote Land Trust, which is a land trust here in the East Bay, and the women who run it have heritage in Ohlone, Chochenyo Ohlone, Karkin, and Bay Miwok. And that feels like important for me to be in touch with Indigenous people whose land I would be walking on and learn from their history and ask for their permission. And it's just an idea that I want to put out there to other people. If you are planning journeys, maybe not asking permission to go somewhere, but recognizing that you're walking on a historically land that has been tended by someone else for generations. And there's an app called Native Land where I got this photo from that you can look up whose land you're on. You could open your app right now and it would tell you exactly where you are and what Indigenous community, what Indigenous tribe historically tended that land. So I'll end with my big gratitudes to the urban school, which is the high school I teach at, and Richard Lautsy, who is my co-teacher and mentor. And I've learned so much about water rights and water in California through that class. And also just want to give gratitude to the fact that this class still exists. I get to teach an experiential education class in modern day. Like all of the field trips get cut for funding and camping trips get cut for funding in most schools. And at Urban School, this class still lives on, and I feel really grateful for that and to get to be a part of it. And I also want to just thank the people who have walked before me in the water world and really be grateful for the work that they've put in so that I can continue to move forward in this water world. And I want to thank Jesse and Urban Adama for having this learning outlet for those of us who are here tonight. Thank you so much. So feel free to stay on if you want, or if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat. I noticed Melissa had posted a little bit earlier an answer to an earlier question, so you can scroll up and read that answer. And if you want to sign up for my emails feel free to go to this website, bit.ly/U A lowercase emails. It has to be the right capitals and lowercases in order to get to the email address. And just stay in touch with me. I love talking water with other people. Feel free to email me personally or reach out anytime. So thank you all so much for being here tonight. And I'm going to stay on Zoom in case anybody wants to hang out or talk for a little bit. So thank you all. And Jesse, I don't know if you're going to come back in and say anything.